Hi there, this is Liam Amara. I've been delaying a post on the Rojava Kurdistan issue because my passions have been high and I wanted to be as measured as I could. This will be long, but I cannot and will not remain silent any longer. I'm in this political race as an expert in the Middle East and Europe, and I have to speak out on this. And if I come across as emphatic or forceful in my word choice at times, I'll say, deal with it, because this is important and I don't want impeachment news to bury it. And, well, in thinking about this before and then in waiting to comment, the action has started already, so I'll start with a few comments on that. Turkish forces have crossed into northern Syria again, this time concentrating on the central and eastern parts of the borderlands, unlike previous incursions which were in the west. The purpose is to push Kurdish forces away from the border, since Syrian Kurds had liberated the territory from Daesh/ISIS and from Syrian regime control, holding territory that is majority Kurdish as well as some Arab regions that had been overrun with terrorists during the Syrian civil war. And that leads to the core problem here. The Turkish government has decided to label all Kurdish militias and governing groups as terrorists. Erdogan's propaganda is that the Turkish military is pushing terrorists away from the border, which will prevent attacks on Turkey from a terror corridor. And never mind that this is frankly insane. It is especially galling given the Turks' patronage of some pretty vicious Islamist terror groups like al-Nusra Front, the Syrian arm of al-Qaeda. Erdogan is labeling as terrorists the more secular and leftist/anarchist Kurdish militias of Rojava, which actively support women and workers' rights, and moving against them in ways that will benefit al-Qaeda and Daesh alike. And this is what Trump has backed. He has stepped aside and told a NATO ally that it can invade Syria, defeat a force of U.S. allies that helped us beat Daesh, and instead support Islamist forces taking their place in Syria. One thing infuriating me about both coverage and debate over Trump's recent actions is the focus on American troops. So let me be as clear as I can. The presence of U.S. troops is irrelevant. They realistically need never have been there and do not need to stay there. I am not making an imperialist apology, and I have no interest in seeing U.S. forces fighting overseas. The troop drawdown is not the problem at all, and so long as talk fixates on that, as long as folks are talking only about like troop movements and U.S. interventionism and all this, they miss the wider points. Now, with active U.S. connivance, Turkey has so far invaded Syria 3 times and is now doing so for a 4th. Its purposes are not benign. The Turkish state has, as I was just saying, actively fed into the religious radicalism of both Daesh fighters and al-Qaeda affiliates, and has been backing reactionary groups in its desire to destabilize Assad's regime. Like Russia, which also claimed to be fighting terrorists while supporting terror in Syria, Turkey has not gotten involved to stop terror. They are doing this in service of a kind of genocide against the Kurdish nation. More on that in a moment. The political problem here is that the Trump administration actively encouraged the Kurds to lower their defenses on the frontier with Turkey, by offering them security guarantees in exchange for making Erdogan happy that way. And this despite their knowing that, with Trump's backing, the Turks had invaded Idlib and Afrin provinces already, in the last couple of years, intent on disrupting territorial contiguity in the Kurdish region, and in the process killing its fighters. So, what Trump did here was greenlight a full-blown invasion of eastern Syria to crush the self-determination movement there. Moving 50 U.S. troops is irrelevant. Removing all 2,000 is irrelevant. Rescinding the guarantee and then actively inviting a foreign power to invade and crush the people who have been our steadfast allies. That is the problem. And what does this foreign power want? The Turkish Republic was founded, we have to remember, on ethno-nationalism. Born in the triple crucible of World War I, the genocides against Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and Syriacs, and the Greek invasion of Ionia in 1919. Out of this was born a majority Turkish-speaking state, which has frequently used right populist and nationalist rhetoric against non-Turks to prop itself up. Kurds, as the largest surviving minority in Anatolia, have faced nearly a century of abuse. That abuse has involved characteristics already applicable to the UN Convention's definition of genocide, e.g., the active suppression of the Kurdish language and denial of their existence as a distinct people. They were long called Mountain Turks. Their independent struggle under Öcalan and the PKK has long since wound down, and their present leaders mostly have sought peaceful coexistence and minority rights. But facing backlashes over his stacking of the courts, jailing of journalists, and attacks on secular democracy, Erdogan has chosen to rely on nationalism to hold on to power. The Turkish military has consequently been stepping up assaults on civilian areas in southeastern Turkey, which is majority Kurdish, and Erdogan has engaged in routine invasions of Iraqi and Syrian territory, taking advantage of those states' present fragility in order to bomb Kurdish infrastructure, defenses, even civilian populations. The goal has been to prevent peaceful unification of Kurds into a shared cultural or political space, though it is having the opposite effect. More on that later. Through all of that, and knowing that Turkey is a NATO ally and thus subject to pressure from Washington, the Kurds in both Iraq and Syria, who are not united, remember, willingly cooperated with us in the fight against Daesh/ISIS. In fact, they played a leading role in that fight, saving many of the Assyrian Christians of Nineveh Plain, helping to liberate the city of Mosul in Iraq, and leading frontal assaults on Daesh positions all over eastern and northern Syria, including the capital, the so-called Caliphate, Raqqa. With U.S. logistical support, the Kurdish forces, both Peshmerga and YPG at Alis, did much of the heavy lifting in the fight against the so-called Caliphate. And what do the Kurds seem to want in return? To be left the hell alone. Even if the global community cannot agree to creation of an independent Kurdistan, their majority regions should still be subject to federalism and a semi-autonomous nature such that their own culture can survive and flourish in the region. No one should be forced to change who she is in order to gain acceptance in the country. Note, e.g., that most of the Syrian Kurds were not even considered citizens of Syria before the present uprising and had little access to government services. This is a long-standing problem in the area and goes back to the creation of all these modern states. And yet, many actors in the modern Middle East have inherited some of the legacy of the late Ottoman state with its nationalistic goal of eliminating the diversity of the Middle East as a whole. In pursuit of homogeneity, we continue to see massacres, forced conversions, gang rapes, and a refugee crisis throwing many minorities out of their homes, fleeing to safety anywhere they can find. This reflects a number of long-term trends, obviously something that I can't spend time talking about here, but suffice to say that neither refugees nor reactionary nationalists are a new occurrence in the Middle East. This is the legacy to which Trump has linked himself, of course, throughout his campaign. The ethno-nationalist desire for dominance. In Erdogan, he has a kindred spirit, and our president's willingness to step aside and allow the Turks to invade Rojava is deeply problematic. That Turkish government, after all, seems to consider any armed Kurd to be a terrorist, despite their not entering Turkey or being party to its history with the PKK. The Kurdish groups across the region, KDP, PUK, PYG, YPG, SDF, PKK, these are all different entities. Some have been able to cooperate due to the crisis with Daesh and the uprising in Syria, but they're not a solid bloc. And let's be blunt, Trump saying he'll wipe out the Turkish economy, which is something the U.S. cannot even do if they don't carry out their operations in as humane a way as possible, is waffly political bullshit, said only because his kowtow to Erdogan was badly received by Republicans. Trump telling Turkey that it can roll into Syria and crush the autonomous region of Rojava, which is one of the more functional areas of the country outside of regime control, is tantamount to endorsing the Turkish policy of cultural and political genocide for Kurds. It will lead to substantial civilian and military casualties. It risks allowing Daesh to break out and make a comeback in the area, so there's more of that. And it threatens to provide a unifying cause for the Kurds, i.e. all-out struggle with Turkey. This is nothing short of a titanic blunder, and all of the blood to come is on our hands. Turkey is a member of NATO and a close ally. If we did not want them fighting in Syria, they could not do it. We are choosing to let this conflict enter a new and potentially more dangerous phase, and in the process betraying, yet again, the trust that the Kurdish leadership and soldiery have placed in the essential goodness of Americans. And in fact, we must not forget the longer history of such failures. Think of what we did with the Iraqi Kurds in the 1980s when we turned our backs and permitted horrific atrocities in Iraqi Kurdistan. Do we need another chemical attack like Halabja? Do we need another Al-Anfal campaign of scorched earth, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder? The Iraqi genocide against the Kurds happened because the world didn't care. Is that still who we are? Do we not care at all? If our president won't do it, we need to tell the Turks that we are watching and we will not forget. The endless cycles of nationalistic genocides must be brought to an end in this region, or anywhere in the world really. We have the political and economic heft to compel Turkey without firing a shot. We lack only the political will to use it, and the ethical/moral compass to understand that massacres are wrong. Our leadership today exhibits a near sociopathic disregard for the suffering of others, and this is not the America I know and love. We can do better. It's time to stand up and demand better. I'm Leo O'Mara. Thanks for listening.